Alyssa Carter stood at the edge of Black Hollow, the town she had left behind nearly 10 years ago. It seemed both familiar and foreign as she gazed down the winding road that led into the heart of the town. The trees that once lined the streets had grown taller, their branches tangling into a canopy of overgrown leaves. The houses, once painted in shades of blue, yellow, and white, were now faded, peeling, some of them abandoned. A thick layer of fog clung to the ground, blanketing the streets in a ghostly veil. It wasn't the first time Alyssa had visited Black Hollow since she'd left for college. She had come back for the occasional summer to see her grandmother, Edith, or to visit friends before they drifted away. But something was different this time. There was a palpable silence hanging in the air, as if the town itself had fallen into a deep, sorrowful slumber. The engine of her car sputtered, struggling to climb the steep hill toward her grandmother's house at the edge of town. Black Hollow had always been small, more of a dot on a map than an actual place. But there had been a time when it felt full of life. The town square was always bustling with the clatter of the market, children playing in the park, and the occasional laughter spilling out of the local diner. That was before. Alyssa's phone buzzed in her lap. She glanced at it briefly. A text from her mother. "Are you there yet?" Alyssa sighed and typed back, "Just getting into town. I'll head to Grandma's house soon." It had been 2 weeks since her grandmother passed away. She had left, behind a small estate in Black Hollow, a house, some land, and a few belongings. There was no immediate family left, just Alyssa and her estranged mother, who hadn't been back in years. As the only living relative, Alyssa was tasked with sorting through her grandmother's affairs. As the car approached the town center, Alyssa noticed something unsettling. Several storefronts were boarded up, their windows covered in faded brown plywood. The small local market, which used to overflow with colorful produce, was dark, its lights long gone. The small diner where Alyssa used to spend afternoons sipping milkshakes was now closed, its sign sagging in the breeze. The town felt abandoned, as though something had hollowed it out, leaving only the bones behind. Alyssa slowed the car, gazing at the empty streets. There were no people in sight, no children running around, no couples walking hand in hand. The town that once felt alive now seemed trapped in an unspoken pause, suspended in time. She thought back to the last time she'd been here, a few summers ago. The town had been vibrant then, full of energy and life. But now it felt like something had consumed that life, leaving only the ghosts behind. Her thoughts were interrupted by the screech of a car door slamming open. Alyssa turned sharply to see a woman standing at the edge of the sidewalk, watching her with narrowed eyes. The woman looked to be in her late 50s, her face weathered by time, and her clothes were tattered and unkempt. Her hair, a tangle of gray, hung loosely over her shoulders. Alyssa's heart skipped a beat. There was something off about the woman's presence, something unsettling. She hadn't seen her before, and yet something about her seemed familiar, like she was a fixture of this place. The woman approached the car slowly, her eyes never leaving Alyssa's. When she reached the driver's side, she tapped on the window with a crooked finger. Alyssa rolled the window down, unsure of what to say. The woman didn't smile. Instead, she spoke in a low, raspy voice, as though the words had been stuck in her throat for years. "You shouldn't be here," the woman said, her voice a whisper that was carried away by the wind. "You don't belong in Black Hollow." Alyssa blinked, taken aback by the strange statement. "Excuse me?" she asked, trying to mask the unease creeping up her spine. The woman took a step closer, her face suddenly taut with intensity. "It's cursed, you know. The town, the house, it's all cursed." Her eyes darted to their view mirror, as though scanning the empty street. "There's no going back once you've come. You should leave. Now. Leave before it's too late." Alyssa didn't know how to respond. The woman's warning, though cryptic and bizarre, hung in the air like an oppressive weight. Was she simply a local who had lived too long in this desolate town? Or was there something more sinister beneath her words? "I'm just here to settle my grandmother's estate," Alyssa said, trying to sound casual. "I'm not staying long." The woman shook her head slowly, her eyes narrowing as if Alyssa's words had no meaning. "It's too late for you. Too late for all of us." She backed away from the car, her gaze never leaving Alyssa's face. "Once you're in Black Hollow, you can't escape. It will claim you, just like it claimed all the others." Before Alyssa could speak, the woman turned abruptly and began walking away, disappearing into the fog that had started to roll in from the horizon. Alyssa sat there, her hands frozen on the steering wheel, staring at the empty spot where the woman had stood just moments before. Her words echoed in her mind, a haunting refrain that refused to leave. Too late. Too late. Shaking off the unease, Alyssa started the car again, pulling toward her grandmother's house. The house, once a warm and inviting place, now seemed to loom in the distance like a dark sentinel. The shutters were closed. The front porch was overgrown with ivy, and the entire house seemed to sag under the weight of time. Alyssa parked the car and sat for a moment, staring at the front door. She had spent countless summers here as a child, playing in the backyard and listening to her grandmother's stories of the past. But now, as an adult, it felt foreign. The house had been silent for weeks, maybe months, since her grandmother had passed. The only thing left to do was to face what was waiting inside. Alyssa grabbed her bag, opened the car door, and stepped into the fog-drenched air. The silence of Black Hollow pressed in on her like a living thing, and the weight of the woman's words lingered in the back of her mind. She wasn't sure if she was ready for what she would find in the house. But she knew one thing for certain. Black Hollow had changed, and whatever had happened to it, whatever had caused the town to fall silent and abandoned, was only just beginning to show its true face. The door creaked as Alyssa stepped inside, the air thick with dust and the scent of decay. The house, though still standing, felt as though it too was holding its breath. She wasn't alone. Not in this house, not in this town, and whatever was lurking here, Alyssa would soon discover, wasn't ready to let her go. Alyssa stood in the dimly lit hallway of her grandmother's house, her footsteps muffled by the thick layer of dust that covered the floors. The air smelled musty, as if the house had been holding its breath for far too long. She shivered despite the warmth of the late afternoon sun streaming through the dusty windows, casting pale light on the faded wallpaper and the old portraits that lined the walls. Her grandmother's house had always felt like a place suspended in time, but now, with its silence and decay, it seemed as though it were fading from reality itself. The once vibrant colors of the rooms had dulled to shades of brown, gray, and yellow, and the scent of pine wood and lavender had been replaced by the stale air of abandonment. Alyssa closed the door behind her, feeling the weight of the house settle around her. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional creak of the old wooden floors or the soft rustle of wind outside. For a moment, she just stood there, letting the quiet wash over her, before forcing herself to move forward. There was no point in standing there and dwelling on the unease that had already begun to settle in her chest. Her grandmother had always loved this place, had always made it feel like a home, and Alyssa owed it to her to make sure everything was taken care of. She made her way through the house, her footsteps echoing through the empty halls. The living room, once filled with family gatherings, now stood in stark emptiness. The furniture was covered in dusty sheets, and the fireplace was cold, the hearth untouched for years. A grand piano sat in the corner, its keys yellowed and brittle, as though waiting for someone to play it again. But Alyssa knew she wouldn't be the one to bring life back into this place. Not now. She headed toward the staircase, her hand resting on the railing, feeling the wood groan beneath her touch. The stairs were narrow and steep, and she made her way up to the second floor, where her grandmother's bedroom had been. When Alyssa reached the top of the stairs, she turned right, toward the door at the end of the hallway. She remembered the way her grandmother's bedroom smelled, of fresh linens, lavender oil, and faint traces of old perfume. But now, the door was ajar, and as Alyssa stepped inside, she was hit by the scent of dust, decay, and something else, something faintly metallic. The room was dark, save for the small slivers of light that filtered through the half-drawn curtains. The bed, once neatly made, was now rumpled and abandoned, the sheets yellowed and stained. Alyssa walked slowly to the bed, her gaze flicking to the objects scattered around the room. Her grandmother's jewelry box sat open on the nightstand, its contents a jumble of tarnished rings and necklaces. A few books lay strewn across the floor, pages yellowed with age. And there, on the far side of the room, behind an old rocking chair, Alyssa noticed a small wooden chest. She couldn't recall ever seeing it before, but something about it caught her attention. Her grandmother had never been one for secrets. She was always open, always willing to share her stories and memories with Alyssa. But there was something about that chest, something that pulled her toward it. Alyssa approached it cautiously, feeling a strange sense of foreboding settle in her gut. The chest was old, much older than anything else in the room. It was small, no bigger than a footlocker, with intricate carvings etched into the wood. There were strange symbols on the lid, ones that Alyssa didn't recognize, but that felt wrong, as if they were watching her. Taking a deep breath, she crouched down and carefully lifted the chest's lid. Inside, nestled among faded velvet, was a collection of papers, yellowed and brittle, with age-stained edges. Alyssa hesitated, her fingers brushing over the papers, before she pulled them out one by one. The first few pages were handwritten in her grandmother's neat flowing script. But the writing on the pages grew more frantic and disjointed the further she went. The words became a jumbled mess, a tangled web of sentences that didn't quite make sense. Her grandmother's handwriting seemed to grow more erratic, as though something had overtaken her hand. "It calls to me," one page read. "The voices from the walls, too many to ignore. I cannot escape it." Alyssa's heart began to race. She flipped through more pages, her eyes scanning the increasingly incoherent words. "The town is changing. The hollow is waking. I must prepare." The last page was torn, the words cut off abruptly. Alyssa set the papers down, her breath shallow. What was this? Why hadn't her grandmother told her about this? She'd always been so open with Alyssa. Why would she hide something like this? The air in the room seemed to shift, growing heavier. Alyssa's skin prickled as though she were being watched. The shadows in the corners of the room felt deeper, darker. The faint metallic smell seemed stronger now, like iron in the air. She shook her head, trying to clear her thoughts. Her grandmother had been old, and perhaps she had grown paranoid in her final years. This was just rambling, the product of a mind fading with age. That had to be it. But Alyssa couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Something was terribly wrong with this house, and with the town of Black Hollow itself. It was as if the walls were breathing, shifting, and the whispers her grandmother had written about were starting to echo in the back of her mind. A loud bang came from downstairs, followed by the sound of someone, scraping across the floor. Alyssa froze, her heart pounding. She listened carefully, but the noise didn't come again. Perhaps it was just the house settling. But as she stood there listening to the silence, she couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't alone. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, and for a moment, Alyssa swore she heard faint whispers. Soft, indistinct voices murmuring from somewhere deep within the walls. Her grandmother's warnings, the cryptic journal, the strange events, it was all too much. Too much to ignore. Alyssa felt a chill run down her spine. She wasn't just here to settle an estate. She was here because Black Hollow, And this house had a story to tell. And it was one that Alyssa wasn't sure she was ready to hear. With a reluctant glance toward the chest and the journal pages, she turned and left the room, the whispers of the house lingering in her ears. There was no turning back now. Alyssa couldn't sleep. The house felt like it was holding its breath. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and the faint, lingering trace of her grandmother's perfume, yet something darker seemed to hang over the place. She had always known Willow Street to be quiet, but tonight the silence felt suffocating, like it was pressing against her from all sides. She had stayed up far too late, combing through the stack of her grandmother's belongings, searching for anything that could explain the strange notes in the journal. It was as if her grandmother had been trying to tell her something important, yet it was written in a code that Alyssa wasn't sure she could decipher. The words had become more frantic toward the end, as though she had been racing against something, trying to warn someone, or perhaps herself, about an impending doom. But there was nothing in the town records, nothing in her grandmother's diaries, that suggested anything out of the ordinary. Black Hollow had always been a quiet, small town, known more for its picturesque charm than any dark secrets. At least that was what Alyssa had believed. But now, as she lay in her grandmother's old bed, the shadows in the room seemed to move on their own. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows as though something was pushing against them, something that didn't belong. The house creaked under the pressure, groaning as though it were alive. Alyssa pulled the covers tighter around her, trying to ignore the creeping sense of dread that seemed to creep into her bones. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind, made her heart race faster, until it felt like the very walls of the house were pressing in on her. And then, just as she thought she might fall asleep, the whispers began. Soft at first, like a faint murmur coming from somewhere deep within the house. Alyssa sat up in bed, her heart pounding. She listened, straining to make out the words, but they were unintelligible, muffled by the thick walls. She shook her head, telling herself it was just the wind or the house settling, but deep down, she knew that wasn't it. The whispers didn't sound like wind. They were too deliberate, too close. The sound grew louder, more distinct. Alyssa felt a chill creep down her spine as the whispering began to form words. Alyssa, it's too late. It's already begun. Leave now. Her breath caught in her throat. The voice sounded faint, almost like a memory, but it was unmistakable. Her grandmother's voice. She threw the covers off and bolted out of bed, heart hammering in her chest. The house was still. Too still. The whispers had stopped, but the air felt thick, electric. She grabbed the flashlight that had been sitting on her nightstand and made her way to the door. As she stepped out into the hallway, the temperature seemed to drop. A cold draft swirled around her, causing the hairs on the back of her neck to stand on end. The house creaked again, but this time it wasn't just the house. There was something else. Something moving just beyond the threshold of her. Hearing. Alyssa walked cautiously down the narrow hallway, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. She had to find out what was happening. She couldn't ignore it anymore. Not after everything she had read in her grandmother's journal. The strange symbols, the frantic warnings, the mention of the hollow. The more she thought about it, the more she felt a deep sense of unease creep into her thoughts. Her grandmother had always been a practical woman, someone who never believed in superstition or ghost stories. But the journal, those last few pages, made it clear that she had feared something that had taken root in Black Hollow. Long ago, something that Alyssa had yet to understand. The whispers returned, this time more forceful, more insistent. Alyssa, don't go to the hollow. Alyssa stopped dead in her tracks. The voice wasn't her grandmother's anymore. It was deeper, more distant, and it made her blood run cold. It wasn't just a warning. It was a command. and it was coming from the direction of the stairs leading down to the basement. She hesitated. The basement. She had never been down there. It had always been locked, something her grandmother had always seemed to avoid mentioning. The few times Alyssa had asked about it, her grandmother had always changed the subject quickly, her eyes darting to the basement door as though she were afraid of it. But now, in the heavy silence of the house, with the whispers growing louder, Alyssa felt an undeniable pull toward it. The basement was the heart of the house, the place where the secrets were hidden, where whatever had been haunting her grandmother had taken root. The beam of her flashlight trembled as her hands shook with a mixture of fear and determination. She couldn't turn back now. She had to know. She had to understand what was going on, or else she would never be able to leave Black Hollow in peace. The basement door creaked loudly as she slowly turned the handle. The cold air from below seeped up through the cracks, carrying with it the smell of old earth and damp wood. As she descended the stairs, the flashlight flickered once, twice, before settling on the darkened room below. The air in the basement was stifling. The stone walls seemed to press in on her, and the floor was covered in a thick layer of dust. Old furniture was piled haphazardly in the corners, tables, chairs, and crates, all abandoned, forgotten. Alyssa's flashlight flickered again, and for a moment, the shadows in the corners seemed to move. She blinked and aimed the light toward them, but there was nothing there. Only the remnants of a once lived-in space, long since forgotten. It was then that she noticed something strange. At the far end of the basement, partially obscured by an old wooden cabinet, was a small door, barely noticeable unless you knew where to look. It was smaller than the others, almost as though it didn't belong. And above it, scrawled in faded red paint, were the same symbols she had seen in her grandmother's journal. Her heart hammered in her chest. This was it. This was what her grandmother had been trying to warn her about. The hollow. The curse. The reason her grandmother had locked the basement away all these years. Alyssa took a step forward, then another, until she was standing in front of the door. The whispers returned, louder now, swirling around her, almost as though they were coming from behind the door itself. It's too late. Too late for you. Her breath caught in her throat. She reached for the door handle, her fingers trembling. Whatever lay beyond this door, Alyssa knew one thing for certain. Black Hollow had never been a peaceful town. And whatever dark force was tied to it, tied to her family, was waiting for her. The echoes of the past were about to become her reality. With a deep breath, she turned the handle and stepped into the unknown. The door creaked open with an eerie groan, the sound reverberating through the empty basement like a warning. Alyssa's pulse quickened, the weight of the house pressing in on her with every breath. The whispers from behind the door faded as she stepped into the narrow, dark passageway that lay beyond. She could feel the air growing colder with each step, the staleness of centuries-old secrets filling her lungs. Her flashlight flickered, casting long shadows across the walls before stabilizing. The passage was tight, only just wide enough for her to squeeze through. The floor was uneven, the stone beneath her feet rough and jagged, but she pressed on, her hand gripping the beam of light as though it were the only thing tethering her to reality. The hallway stretched far deeper into the earth than she had expected. It felt like she was descending into something ancient, something buried far beneath the surface of Black Hollow. The walls, slick with moisture, seemed to pulse with an energy that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. The faintest hint of something metallic lingered in the air, like old iron or rusted nails. The deeper she went, the stronger, the feeling of dread that wrapped itself around her. At the end of the passage, the hallway opened up into a small, cramped room. There, in the center, stood a large stone altar, covered in dust and cobwebs. Alyssa's breath hitched in her chest as she took in the scene. The altar was carved with strange symbols, similar to those in her grandmother's journal. These were far more intricate, their edges sharp and unforgiving. They seemed to twist and writhe beneath her gaze, as if the stone itself were alive. The floor around the altar were scattered fragments of broken pottery, old bones, and what looked like remnants of a ritual long forgotten. The symbols were repeated in the dirt on the walls, scratched hastily, as though someone had been trying to erase them, or perhaps trying to warn others. The atmosphere in the room was heavy, almost suffocating, and Alyssa felt the oppressive weight of the space press in on her, as if it were waiting for something, or someone. Suddenly, she noticed something strange. In the far corner, partially obscured by shadows, was a small chest, exactly like the one she had seen in her grandmother's room. But this one was older, covered in dust and cobwebs, its wood warped with age. The faintest hint of the same red symbol she had seen earlier was painted on the chest's surface, barely visible under the grime. Alyssa felt her breath catch in her throat. She was drawn to it, inexplicably, as if the chest itself were calling to her. She moved toward it, her legs heavy, each step taking more effort than the last. Her flashlight illuminated the worn wood of the chest, and she could almost feel the energy crackling in the air as she reached for the lid. As her fingers brushed against the wood, she froze. The whispers returned, louder now, urgent, echoing through the small room. "Don't open it. Leave now. Leave before it's too late." Her grandmother's voice, or something else. It was impossible to tell, but the fear in the tone sent a cold shiver through her spine. Alyssa's hand hovered above the chest, torn between the growing curiosity and the overwhelming sense of dread that had settled over her. She could leave. She could walk back up the narrow passageway, close the door behind her, and forget she had ever come down here. But something inside her resisted that notion. This place, these symbols, her grandmother's cryptic warnings. There was too much she didn't understand. And the truth, however horrifying, was now something she had to face. She had to know what was buried here, beneath Black Hollow, and why it had been hidden away. Her fingers clenched around the chest's handle, the wood splintering slightly beneath her touch. With a final, trembling breath, she pulled the lid. Open. Inside, a mass of tangled roots and dark, twisting vines lay coiled together, thick and black as if they were alive. They were bound together by a strange, pulsing energy that radiated from them in waves. The roots throbbed in time with her heartbeat, a slow, rhythmic pulse that seemed to echo through the room. Alyssa recoiled, her stomach lurching at the sight of them. But then, among the roots, she saw something else. Something small, buried in the tangle of vines. She reached in cautiously, her fingers trembling, and pulled out what appeared to be an old, weathered book. It was bound in dark leather, its edges frayed with age, and the cover was stamped with the same red symbols that had haunted her grandmother's journal. Her breath caught as she held it up to the light. The book seemed to hum in her hands, as though it were alive, the energy emanating from it almost suffocating. Alyssa's mind screamed at her to put it down, to walk away and never look back, but she couldn't. There was no turning back now. With a deep breath, she opened the book. The pages were yellowed and brittle, the ink faded but still legible. The language was foreign, unlike anything she had ever seen before, but the symbols were familiar. Those same twisting, writhing shapes that had appeared on the altar, on the chest, and in her grandmother's journal. She flipped through the pages, her eyes scanning the strange text. At first it made no sense, but then, as she focused, the words began to take shape in her mind, forming a coherent thought. The hollow must be fed. The hollow demands a sacrifice. The blood of the innocent shall awaken the hollowing, and the town will belong to it once more. Alyssa's heart pounded in her chest as the words sunk in. The hollow, the town, the curse, it was all tied together. But why hadn't her grandmother told her? Why had she hidden this book, this knowledge, away? She felt a sudden compulsion to keep reading, as though the book itself were pulling her deeper into its grasp. The more she read, the more the room seemed to shift, the walls narrowing, the air growing thick with a presence that wasn't quite human. The whispers grew louder, more urgent, pleading with her to stop. You must leave before it takes you, before you become part of the hollow. It's too late for the others, but you can still escape. You can still... The words were abruptly cut off as the book snapped shut on its own, the force so strong it almost knocked Alyssa off her feet. She gasped, stepping back as the room seemed to darken, the air around her thickening with an oppressive weight. Her flashlight flickered and then died entirely, plunging her into pitch black. The whispering voices stopped, replaced by an unsettling silence that made her ears ring. Something moved in the darkness. A soft, almost imperceptible rustle, like the shifting of something ancient waking from a long slumber. Alyssa's heart raced as she fumbled for the flashlight, but she couldn't bring herself to look around. Not yet. She had seen enough, heard enough. The house was alive with something dark, something tied to the very fabric of Black Hollow itself. A figure stepped out from the shadows, a shape, barely human, covered in the black vines she had seen earlier. The vines twisted and curled around its limbs, reaching out toward her like hungry fingers. Alyssa couldn't breathe. She had come for answers, but now she knew the truth. The Hollow wasn't just a town. It was a hunger, and it was awake. Alyssa's heart hammered in her chest as the figure in the darkness took a step forward, its limbs creaking like dry branches under pressure. The air around her thickened with something wet, suffocating, the damp, musty smell of decay, mixed with the sharp tang of iron. Her fingers trembled around the flashlight, but no matter how much she tried to steady her breath, she couldn't shake the overwhelming sense of dread that flooded her. The figure was humanoid, but it was wrong. Its body was twisted and misshapen, limbs too long, skin pale and slick like the surface of a rotten apple. Black vines, like the ones tangled in the chest, wrapped around it, slithering and wriggling with an unnatural life. It moved with an eerie, almost fluid motion, its head tilting to the side as if considering her. Its eyes, if they could be, called eyes, were hollow pits, black as ink, and seemed to absorb the light around them. Alyssa's breath caught in her throat as it moved closer. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to escape, but her feet were frozen to the ground. The thing's presence was so overpowering, so suffocating, that it was as though the very air had turned to quicksand, trapping her in place. "You shouldn't have come here," the figure rasped, its voice like the crackling of dry leaves in the wind, distorted and broken. "The Hollow has claimed you now. There's no turning back." Alyssa's pulse raced. The words reverberated in her mind, twisting around her thoughts like a vine choking the life from her. The Hollow. Her grandmother's warnings, the journal, the altar. She was in the heart of it now, in the very place that had been hidden away for so long, and whatever this thing was, it was part of it. She shook her head, forcing her legs to move. There was a glimmer of light at the end of the passage, where the door she had entered stood ajar. But the figure blocked her path, its slow, unnatural movements keeping her trapped in the basement. The shadows seemed to grow thicker, pressing in on her, suffocating her with their cold embrace. Inside, a mass of tangled roots and dark, twisting vines lay coiled together, thick and black as if they were alive. They were bound together by a strange, pulsing energy that radiated from them in waves. The roots throbbed in time with her heartbeat, a slow, rhythmic pulse that seemed to echo through the room. Alyssa recoiled, her stomach lurching at the sight of them. But then, among the roots, she saw something else, something small, buried in the tangle of vines. She reached in cautiously, her fingers trembling, and pulled out what appeared to be an old, weathered book. It was bound in dark leather, its edges frayed with age, and the cover was stamped with the same red symbols that had haunted her grandmother's journal. Her breath caught as she held it up to the light. The book seemed to hum in her hands, as though it were alive, the energy emanating from it almost suffocating. Alyssa's mind screamed at her to put it down, to walk away and never look back. But she couldn't. There was no turning back now. With a deep breath, she opened the book. The pages were yellowed and brittle, the ink faded but still legible. The language was foreign, unlike anything she had ever seen before. But the symbols were familiar. Those same twisting, writhing shapes that had appeared on the altar, on the chest, and in her grandmother's journal. She flipped through the pages, her eyes scanning the strange text. At first it made no sense, but then, as she focused, the words began to take shape in her mind, forming a coherent thought. The hollow must be fed. The hollow demands a sacrifice. The blood of the innocent shall awaken the hollowing, and the town will belong to it once more. Alyssa's heart pounded in her chest as the words sunk in. The hollow, the town, the curse. It was all tied together. But why hadn't her grandmother told her? Why had she hidden this book, this knowledge, away? She felt a sudden compulsion to keep reading, as though the book itself were pulling her deeper into its grasp. The more she read, the more the room seemed to shift, the walls narrowing, the air growing thick with a presence that wasn't quite human. The whispers grew louder, more urgent, pleading with her to stop. You must leave before it takes you, before you become part of the hollow. It's too late for the others, but you can still escape. You can still... The words were abruptly cut off as the book snapped shut on its own. The force so strong it almost knocked Alyssa off her feet. She gasped, stepping back as the room seemed to darken, the air around her thickening with an oppressive weight. Her flashlight flickered and then died entirely, plunging her into pitch black. The whispering voices stopped, replaced by an unsettling silence that made her ears ring. Something moved in the darkness. A soft, almost imperceptible rustle, like the shifting of something ancient waking from a long slumber. Alyssa's heart raced as she fumbled for the flashlight, but she couldn't bring herself to look around. Not yet. She had seen enough, heard enough. The house was alive with something dark, something tied to the very fabric of Black Hollow itself. A figure stepped out from the shadows, a shape, barely human, covered in the black vines she had seen earlier. The vines twisted and curled around its limbs, reaching out toward her like hungry fingers. Alyssa couldn't breathe. She had come for answers, but now she knew the truth. The hollow wasn't just a town. It was a hunger, and it was awake. Alyssa's heart hammered in her chest as the figure in the darkness took a step forward, its limbs creaking like dry branches under pressure. The air around her thickened with something wet, suffocating. The damp, musty smell of decay mixed with the sharp tang of iron. Her fingers trembled around the flashlight, but no matter how much she tried to steady her breath, she couldn't shake the overwhelming sense of dread that flooded her. The figure was humanoid, but it was wrong. Its body was twisted and misshapen, limbs too long, skin pale and slick like the surface of a rotten apple. Black vines, like the ones tangled in the chest, wrapped around it, slithering and wriggling with an unnatural life. It moved with an eerie, almost fluid motion, its head tilting to the side as if considering her. Its eyes, if they could be, called eyes, were hollow pits, black as ink, and seemed to absorb the light around them. Alyssa's breath caught in her throat as it moved closer. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to escape, but her feet were frozen to the ground. The thing's presence was so overpowering, so suffocating, that it was as though the very air had turned to quicksand, trapping her in place. You shouldn't have come here, the figure rasped, its voice like the crackling of dry leaves, in the wind, distorted and broken. The hollow has claimed you now. There's no turning back. Alyssa's pulse raced. The words reverberated in her mind, twisting around her thoughts like a vine choking the life from her. The hollow, her grandmother's warnings, the journal, the altar. She was in the heart of it now, in the very place that had been hidden away. For so long, and whatever this thing was, it was part of it. She shook her head, forcing her legs to move. There was a glimmer of light at the end of the passage, where the door she had entered stood ajar, but the figure blocked her path, its slow, unnatural movements keeping her trapped in the basement. The shadows seemed to grow thicker, pressing in on her, suffocating her with their cold embrace. "Leave. Before it's too late," the voice rasped. But this time there was something else, something deeper, something hungry in its tone. Alyssa couldn't make sense of the words. Fear gripped her chest so tightly that it felt like her heart might stop beating altogether. The thing's presence was overwhelming, its gaze unblinking as it stepped closer, the sound of its breath like a gust of wind through dead leaves. Suddenly, she remembered the book, the dark leather journal that had led her here, the book that had spoken of the Hollow's hunger, its need for a sacrifice. Alyssa's hands shook as she reached for it, pulling it from the chest. She could barely keep her thoughts straight as she opened the pages once more, hoping to find something, anything, that could explain how to stop whatever was happening. The Hollow is eternal. The Hollow demands blood. The words seemed to burn into her mind as she read them aloud, the air growing even heavier around her. The figure stepped closer still, the vines creeping toward her, as if drawn by the very words she spoke. The book was alive in her hands, its pages vibrating, humming with an energy that matched the pulsing dark power surrounding her. To break the cycle, one must give, one must surrender. Blood must feed the Hollow, or it will rise again. Alyssa's eyes widened. Surrender? Blood? Her mind raced. She knew what the book was saying. It wasn't just a warning, it was a command. The Hollow needed to feed, and it had been waiting for someone to fulfill the sacrifice. Someone like her. Someone who had come to the town at the wrong time. Someone who had unknowingly opened the door to the darkness that had been buried for so long. The figure moved again, its limbs dragging along the floor closer, so close now, that Alyssa could feel its cold breath on her skin, could smell the rot that clung to it. Her body screamed for her to run, but her mind was paralyzed, caught in the web of knowledge the book had given her. Then, a soft sound, a scraping noise, cut through the thick air. Alyssa's gaze snapped toward the corner of the room where the stone altar stood. The vines had begun to move again, shifting and crawling like snakes on the floor. And there, in the center of the altar, the ground trembled, as if something beneath it was awakening. The symbols on the walls seemed to writhe, twisting in on themselves as though they were alive, drawn to the beating of Alyssa's heart. The Hollow was waking. Without thinking, Alyssa slammed the book shut, throwing it away from her with a wild cry. The figure shrieked, an inhuman, shrill sound that made Alyssa's blood run cold as the book hit the floor. The vines recoiled, snapping back like burnt tendrils, and the creature stumbled back, as if struck by an invisible force. For a moment, the room fell silent, the tension hanging in the air like a storm waiting to break. "You don't understand," the thing rasped, its voice shaking now, desperate. "The Hollow has always been here. It is inside the town, inside everything. It is the land itself. It will claim you, and then it will rise again." Alyssa's mind was racing. The Hollow wasn't just a force. It was the town itself. It was what had kept Black Hollow alive all these years, feeding on the lives of the people who had lived there. The people who had been drawn into its grip, just like her. Her grandmother had known this, had feared it. That was why she had hidden the book, why she had kept everything secret. The people in town, the ones who had avoided her, had known the truth. They had been hiding, waiting, but their time had run out. The Hollow had been fed, and now it was waking. The creature reached for her again, its fingers elongated, its nails black and sharp. But Alyssa took a step back, her foot catching on something. She glanced down, her hand instinctively reaching for the cold, smooth surface of the stone altar. The vines recoiled, and in that moment she understood. She was the sacrifice. The hollow had been waiting for her, waiting for someone to open the door. She had unlocked the cycle. And now, the hollow was hungry. But she wasn't going to feed it. Not yet. With a cry, she grabbed the nearest object, the broken remnants of a pot from the floor, and hurled it at the creature. It recoiled, and Alyssa, with a surge of adrenaline, turned and ran for the passageway. She could hear the thing's guttural scream behind her, the sound of it rushing toward her with unnatural speed, the hunger in its voice growing louder. The hollow was not done with her. It wouldn't let her escape so easily. But Alyssa wasn't ready to be claimed by the darkness. Not yet. She dashed up the narrow corridor, her breaths ragged, and as she burst through the basement door, she heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps following her. She wasn't alone anymore. The hollow had risen, and it was coming for her. Alyssa's feet pounded against the wooden floorboards as she sprinted up the stairs, her pulse pounding in her ears. She didn't dare look back. She could hear the thing behind her, its twisted form scraping against the walls of the narrow passageway, its breath hot and wet on the air. The house itself seemed to shift, its walls closing in as though it were conspiring to trap her. She reached the top of the stairs and slammed the basement door behind her, but she knew it wouldn't be enough to stop whatever was coming. The house groaned under the pressure of something ancient, something dark, and Alyssa knew with a sickening certainty that it had already claimed the town. Black Hollow wasn't a place. It was a living thing, a hungry thing, and now it was awake. She staggered through the house, her mind racing. There had to be something, some way to stop it. But the words in the book, the symbols on the altar, they had all pointed to the same truth. The hollow needed blood. It had always needed blood, and it had been feeding for years, until it had become something more, something insatiable. Alyssa reached her grandmother's room, the door wide open, and paused at the threshold. The room looked so ordinary, so much like it had when she had left it as a child, but now there was nothing comforting about it. The air felt thick, as though the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Her grandmother's journal lay on the desk, still open to the page she had left off on. Alyssa's heart raced as she scanned the words again. There had to be something she missed, some clue that could explain how to stop the hollow before it consumed everything in its path. The hollow will claim all who are tied to it. The bloodline, the ones who awaken it, will feed it. But there is another way? Alyssa's hands shook as she read the last few lines. She hadn't seen them before. There was a note of finality in her grandmother's writing now, as though she had known her time was running out. To end it, to banish the hollow, one must sever the bond. A willing sacrifice must be made, but not for the hollow itself. The blood must be given freely to break the cycle. The words echoed in her mind. A willing sacrifice. To break the cycle. Her bloodline. Her family. Alyssa's breath caught in her throat as the realization hit her like a tidal wave. Her grandmother had known. She had known that the hollow was tied to the very land, to the people of Black Hollow, and that the only way to stop it, truly stop it, was to sever that bond. But how? How could she be the one to end it when the very thing she feared was tied so deeply to her own existence? The house groaned again, louder now, as if the hollow itself were waking with a thirst that couldn't be quenched. The walls seemed to tremble as Alyssa stepped back from the journal. She had to act. She had to figure out what the next step was. But there was so little time. The thing from the basement, whatever it was coming for her. Her mind raced through the possibilities. Her grandmother had spoken of blood, of sacrifice. But how could it be done? How could she stop something that had been feeding on the town's fear for so long? And what if she was too late? Suddenly she heard it, footsteps from below. The thing in the basement was getting closer. The hollow's hunger was growing louder, and Alyssa could feel it in her bones. With a desperate glance toward the window, she saw the fog rolling in from the hills, thick and swirling, like a living creature. The town was already consumed. Black Hollow was more than a place. It was a trap, and if she didn't act soon, the Hollow would claim her too. A willing sacrifice, she repeated, her voice trembling. It was the only way. But what did it mean? Who or what could she sacrifice to stop the Hollow? Her mind flashed to the people in Black Hollow, the residents she'd seen earlier, the ones who had seemed so distant, so withdrawn. They must have known. They had to. Alyssa turned on her, heel, heading toward the front door. If there was a way to stop this, it had to be with the town's help. The residents, they had to be involved. The sacrifice wasn't just about her, it was about all of them. They had all been tied to the Hollow's curse. Their blood had nourished it, and only together could they end it. As she approached the door, the shadows in the room seemed to stretch out, twisting in unnatural angles. The whispers began again, louder now, as if they were speaking directly into her mind. You can't stop it. You can't escape. The Hollow is inside you now. Alyssa flinched, but the words were too real, too heavy. Her grandmother's warnings echoed in her ears, but the truth was undeniable. The Hollow had claimed the town. And now, it was coming for her. With a final, desperate breath, Alyssa threw open the front door. The town of Black Hollow was shrouded in a thick, unnatural fog, swirling in chaotic patterns as though something had torn through the fabric of reality itself. The air felt alive, charged with a dark energy that pressed down on her chest, heavy and suffocating. Alyssa stepped outside, the chill of the fog wrapping around her like a cold blanket. The streets were eerily silent, the once familiar buildings looming like forgotten giants, their windows dark and vacant. The few houses still standing seemed abandoned, their doors ajar, their windows cracked. It was as though the town had been forsaken, left to rot under the weight of the Hollow's influence. But there were no bodies, no signs of life, only the fog. The hairs on the back of her neck prickled as the ground beneath her feet seemed to tremble, a low, rumbling sound echoing through the streets. Something was coming. Alyssa knew she had to act fast. The Hollow was closing in, and the fog was only the beginning. But where could she go? Who could help her now? Her gaze turned toward the town square, the place where she had first arrived, in Black Hollow. The old church loomed in the distance, its steeple piercing the fog like a dagger. The church. Her grandmother had spoken of it in her journal, hinted that the key to stopping the Hollow was tied to the church. Maybe, just maybe, if she could get there, if she could uncover the last of the town's hidden secrets, she could put an end to this nightmare once and for all. She took a step toward the church, her breath coming in shallow gasps, but fog shifted again, closing in on her, and she knew with sickening certainty that time was running out. The Hollow was hungry, and she was the last sacrifice it needed. But she wasn't ready to give in. Not yet. The fog thickened as Alyssa made her way toward the old church, the town square eerily silent around her. Every step felt heavy, as if the earth itself was pulling her down. She could hear her breath coming in shallow gasps, the oppressive air pressing in on her chest. The town, her childhood home, was no longer familiar. It had become something darker, something that had shifted with the weight of the Hollow's hunger. The church loomed ahead, its steeple piercing the sky like a dark sentinel. It had always been a place of refuge in the past, a symbol of hope, but now it seemed like a tomb, silent and cold. The windows were dark, their glass cracked and grimy. The door, once grand and inviting, hung slightly ajar as though waiting for her to enter. Alyssa hesitated. She could feel the eyes of the hollow watching her, as though the town itself was aware of her every movement. It was everywhere. The buildings, the ground beneath her feet, the fog. Black Hollow had always been a place of secrets, of old stories and ancient rituals, but now it was something far worse. It was a place of hunger, a hunger that had been festering for generations, and now she was the key to its awakening. She swallowed hard and pushed the door open. It creaked in protest, the sound unnervingly loud in the dead silence. The church was darker inside, the air thick with dust and mildew. Her flashlight flickered to life, casting long shadows across the pews and stained glass windows. The faint remnants of light filtered through the cracked panes, casting fractured rainbows across the stone floor. It should have been peaceful, calm, but instead the air felt charged with something sinister, something ancient. The moment Alyssa stepped inside, a heavy presence settled over her. The darkness in the church seemed to deepen, as though the shadows themselves were alive, watching her every move. The low hum of the hollow's energy pulsed beneath the floor, vibrating through the stone. She could feel it in her bones. She took another step, and the creaking of the floorboards echoed in the otherwise silent space. Her mind raced as she scanned the room. The altar, once a place of reverence, stood at the far end of the church, draped in tattered white cloths. Candles, long burned out, sat in their holders like forgotten relics. But it was the altar itself that drew her in. There was something about it, something almost familiar. Her grandmother had spoken of the church in her journal, but she had never mentioned this. It wasn't just any altar. It was a focal point, a center for the rituals that had bound the town to the hollow. Alyssa walked toward it, the pull of the altar magnetic, almost like the ground beneath her feet was trying to drag her toward it. As she got closer, she saw something etched into the stone beneath the cloth, symbols identical to those she had seen in her grandmother's journal, in the basement, on the altar. They were ancient, their edges worn from centuries of use, but the symbols seemed to pulse with life, their dark lines shifting slightly, as though they were moving beneath the surface of the stone. Her fingers trembled as she reached out and lifted the cloth. The symbols underneath were not just etched into the stone, they were carved deep, as if the altar had been hollowed out intentionally. In the center of the altar was a depression, a deep, circular indentation, wide enough to fit a person's body. A cold sweat beaded on her forehead as she realized what it was for. The hollow's offering. Her grandmother's words echoed in her mind. To end it, to banish the hollow, one must sever the bond. A willing sacrifice must be made, but not for the hollow itself. The blood must be given freely to break the cycle, the sacrifice. Alyssa's stomach churned. She couldn't be the one. She couldn't be the one to end it. Her grandmother had spoken of it, of the sacrifice that would break the cycle, but she hadn't known what it would entail. She had only hoped that one day someone would come along to find the truth, to stop it before it was too late. But now, Alyssa understood. The bond that tied the town to the hollow was blood, the bloodline of her family. Her grandmother had known that she was the one to break it, but the price was too high. She couldn't do it. She couldn't become the sacrifice. But if not her, then who? The thought struck her like a bolt of lightning. Alyssa stepped back from the altar, her breath coming faster now. She needed to think, to find another way. The townspeople. Maybe they knew something. Maybe they could help. But as she turned to leave, a sound stopped her dead in her tracks. A soft creak, followed by another. The unmistakable sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, heavy. She wasn't alone. Her heart thudded painfully in her chest as she turned toward the sound. From the shadows near the back of the church, a figure stepped forward. It was a man, tall, gaunt, his face gaunt and hollow. His eyes were black, dark, and empty, like the pits of the church windows. His clothes were old, tattered, as though he had been standing there for a long time, watching. Alyssa's breath caught in her throat. The man was dressed in a faded black suit, his white shirt stained with something dark, something that looked too much like blood. The priest. The man's lips curled into a faint, unsettling smile, his teeth yellowed and sharp. "You've come at last," he said, his voice smooth but cold, like the rustling of dry leaves. "I've been waiting for you." Alyssa's mind raced, trying to make sense of the figure before her. He didn't look like any priest she had known. There was something wrong about him, something unnatural. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice shaky but firm. The priest tilted his head, his dark eyes never leaving hers. "I am the keeper of the hollow," he said softly, "the one who tends to its needs. And you, my dear, are the one who will feed it." Alyssa's blood ran cold. "No, I won't do it." He chuckled softly, the sound like the scraping of nails on stone. "Oh, but you already have, haven't you? You've already opened the door. The hollow knows you now. It has been waiting for you." Alyssa stumbled backward, her mind racing. "What do you want from me?" The priest took a slow step toward her, his smile widening. "You have come to end the curse, but there is no ending it. Not for you, not for anyone. The hollow is eternal, my dear, and now you are part of it. Your blood, your line, tied to it forever." Alyssa's heart hammered in her chest as she looked at the priest, her mind spinning. The hollow had always been here, always fed on the bloodline of her family, and now she was caught in its grip, its hunger. She could feel it now, deep within her. The pull of the hollow, its insatiable desire for blood. Her blood. No, Alyssa's. Hands clenched into fists as she turned to face the altar once more. She could feel the weight of the town pressing in on her. The hollow was awake, and there was only one way to stop it, to sever the bond. But it wasn't her blood that had to be spilled. It was the priest's. Her mind raced with the realization. She wasn't the one meant to sacrifice herself. Not yet. She had to make the priest bleed, to use him as the offering. He was the one who had been feeding the hollow all these years, who had been keeping it alive. With a surge of adrenaline, Alyssa turned and ran toward him, the words of her grandmother's journal echoing in her mind. She wasn't going to be a sacrifice. Not today. The priest lunged toward her, his hands outstretched, but Alyssa was faster. She grabbed the nearest object, a broken candlestick, and swung it at him with all her strength. The hollow's hunger was not hers to feed. Not yet. The air in Black Hollow felt colder tonight. Alyssa stood in front of Clara, her heart pounding in her chest. The moon hung heavy in the sky, casting long shadows across the abandoned streets. The town, once a place of whispered secrets, now felt like a cursed relic, waiting for something to happen. The wraith's presence loomed, seeping into the very fabric of the town. The feeling of dread was palpable, like a thick fog rolling in, and Alyssa could feel its weight pressing on her chest. "You're the last piece, Alyssa." Clara's voice was low, almost a whisper. "Our family has been waiting for you. The ritual can't be completed without you." Alyssa blinked, her confusion deepening. "What ritual? What are you talking about?" Clara's cold eyes pierced through her. "The curse. It's been here for generations. The wraith isn't just some monster. It's tied to this town, and it's tied to your bloodline." She paused, letting the words sink in. "The ritual will either end it all or seal Black Hollow's fate forever." Alyssa's mind spun. Her family had always kept their distance from the town's dark history, but now it seemed like she couldn't escape it. Clara stepped closer, her presence overwhelming. "The curse will consume us all unless someone offers themselves to the Wraith," Clara continued. "It's the only way to stop it. You've been chosen, Alyssa, just like your ancestors. We all knew this day would come." Alyssa recoiled. "What are you asking me to do?" Clara's lips twisted into something resembling a grim smile. "Sacrifice. Yourself. Give yourself to the Wraith. You've seen what it does, how it feeds on the souls of the town. You've seen the way it's grown stronger. The people here have suffered long enough. But your death could end it." The words were like a weight pressing on her chest, suffocating her. She shook her head, struggling to breathe. "I can't. I won't do it. There has to be another way." Clara's gaze softened for a brief moment before turning cold again. "There is no other way. Not anymore. The Wraith's hunger has grown too strong. You can feel it, can't you? The pull. It's only a matter of time before it devours everything." Alyssa's hands trembled. She wanted to run, to scream, to deny everything that was happening, but she couldn't. She had come back to Black Hollow for answers, and now she was faced with the horrifying truth. Her bloodline was tied to the curse, and the only way to end it was through sacrifice. But Clara was right about one thing. The Wraith was growing stronger. The townspeople had been whispering about strange occurrences, disappearances, and the way the Wraith's influence had seeped into their lives. "Why me?" Alyssa's voice cracked as she spoke. "Why do I have to be the one to end this?" Clara's eyes softened. "Because you are the final key. Your bloodline holds the power to bind the curse, to offer the Wraith what it needs. It has to be you." Alyssa wanted to scream, to protest, but a strange sense of inevitability filled her. She could feel the weight of the curse, the way it had been building for years, waiting for her. The town's suffering had been building up, and now it all rested on her shoulders. "You're asking me to die," Alyssa whispered. Clara nodded. "It's the only way to stop the Wraith. You will save them all. The town will be free." Alyssa felt like the ground was falling out from under her. She had thought she was coming back to Black Hollow to understand the past, to uncover her family's secrets. But now the truth was clearer than ever. She wasn't here to solve a mystery. She was here to end a curse that had been tied to her family for generations. The weight of it all threatened to crush her. "I can't," she whispered again, this time with more conviction. "I won't let myself be the sacrifice. There has to be another way." Clara sighed deeply, her face shadowed by regret. "You don't understand, Alyssa. There is no other way. You're the last hope for this town. But if you refuse, everything will be consumed. The Wraith won't stop. The town will burn, and everyone in it will be lost." Alyssa took a step back, her mind racing. Her thoughts swirled with the faces of the people she had known, the friends she had left behind, and the life she had tried to escape. If she sacrificed herself, the town would be free, but she would never get to see the world outside Black Hollow. She would never get to live a life beyond the curse. But if she refused, the town would fall, people would die, the darkness would spread, and the Wraith's influence would grow until it consumed everything. The choice seemed impossible. The weight of it was unbearable. "You're asking me to give up everything," Alyssa said, her voice thick with emotion. "How can I just let go of my life like that?" Clara looked at her with a mixture of sadness and understanding. "Because it's the only way to stop the cycle. It's the price of breaking the curse. Your family has paid it for generations, and now it's your turn." Alyssa closed her eyes, her mind spinning with conflicting thoughts. She had always felt like she didn't belong here, that Black Hollow was a place from which she needed to escape. But now, the choice had come back to her. She could leave, abandon the town and everyone in it, or she could face the curse head-on and end it once and for all. "I don't want to die," Alyssa said softly, but her voice was steady. "But I can't let this town be destroyed either. I'll do it." Clara's eyes softened, and for the first time, Alyssa saw the hint of relief in them. "You're doing the right thing." Alyssa swallowed hard, bracing herself. "What happens now?" Clara stepped back, the ritual book in her hands now open, to a page Alyssa had never seen before. The final step of the ritual was about to begin, and with it, Alyssa's fate would be sealed. Alyssa stood at the edge of the cemetery, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The moon above had shifted into the perfect alignment, its pale light casting eerie shadows across the gravestones. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth, and the distant rustle of leaves was the only sound that dared to break the oppressive silence. In front of her stood the wraith, its blackened form now more tangible, more powerful than she had ever seen it before. It was as if the very earth trembled beneath its presence. Her heart pounded in her chest, the weight of the decision pressing down on her with each passing second. "You've come, Alyssa," the wraith's voice rasped, an unsettling echo that reverberated through the night. "I knew you would. It's time to end it." Alyssa gripped the amulet around her neck, the same one she had worn since she was a child. It had always been a connection to her family, a reminder of the past she had longed to escape. Now, it felt like a tether, binding her to this moment, this impossible choice. She had come so far, but the end was in sight, and the path ahead was dark, uncertain. "I'm ready," she whispered, though the words felt hollow, even to her own ears. The wraith's cold gaze fixed on her. "Are you, child? Are you truly ready to give yourself to me? To sacrifice yourself for the town you once called home?" Alyssa's stomach twisted at the thought, but she nodded. "I'll do it. I'll end the curse, no matter the cost." The wraith let out a low, throaty laugh, its form shifting in the moonlight like smoke. Such noble words. But it's not as simple as you think. I've watched you, Alyssa. I know your heart. I know you can't bear to let others suffer. Alyssa clenched her fists, fighting the rising panic. "Then let me do it. Let me end this." The wraith floated closer, its presence almost suffocating. "There's another way," it said, its voice dripping with temptation. "Another way that would spare your life. You see, the curse isn't just tied to you. It's tied to the very blood that has been sacrificed in its name. And there's someone here, someone already bound to the curse. If you offer them instead, I will release Black Hollow from its grasp." Alyssa's mind reeled. Who? Who are you talking about?" The wraith's hollow eyes narrowed. "You know who. Clara. She is the one who has kept the town bound for so long. Her sacrifice, her blood, has kept the ritual going. She is the key, Alyssa. If you give her to me, the curse will be broken, and Black Hollow will be free." Alyssa's breath caught in her throat. Clara. The woman who had been by her side, guiding her through the dark history of their family. The woman who had told her she was the final piece of the puzzle. The woman who had sacrificed so much to keep the curse alive. "You're lying," Alyssa said, her voice barely a whisper, but the truth of it gnawed at her insides. She didn't want to believe it, but she knew deep down that the wraith was telling the truth. Clara's blood had always been tied to the curse, her lineage woven into the fabric of Black Hollow's suffering. "Am I?" The wraith's grin widened, its features twisting in the moonlight. "You see, Alyssa, the choice is yours. Sacrifice yourself, as the ritual demands, and you will end the curse forever. Or offer Clara instead. The town will be saved, and you will walk free, unharmed. You'll live to see a world beyond this cursed place." Alyssa stumbled backward, her mind spinning. Clara had been her ally, her guide, but now Now the Wraith was offering her a way out, a way to save the town without dying. The temptation to take the easy route, to spare herself, to save herself from the crushing weight of sacrifice, almost overpowered her. But then, Clara's face flashed in her mind, her unwavering determination, her sacrifices. Was it possible? Could Clara really be the one who had been keeping the curse alive all along? Alyssa's heart twisted painfully. Could she betray her friend to save herself? Could she be the one to condemn Clara to the Wraith's grip in order to live? "Why are you making me choose?" Alyssa cried out, frustration and fear rising in her chest. "Why can't I break the curse without this, without destroying someone else?" The Wraith's form flickered, its presence shifting into something almost human for a moment, because the curse is not so simple. It is bound by blood, by sacrifice. Only one will break the chain, and that one must be chosen. The choice is always difficult, Alyssa. It's always about sacrifice, and you must choose. Alyssa's hands trembled at her sides, her nails digging into her palms as she fought to steady herself. There was no escape from this. There was no perfect solution. She had always believed in doing the right thing, in making the noble choice, but now she was being asked to choose between her own survival and the life of the person who had helped her along this dark path. Her breath came, faster, her thoughts chaotic. "I don't want to do this," she whispered, the words heavy with despair. "But I have to. I have to stop the curse." The Wraith tilted its head as if studying her. "You are stronger than you realize, Alyssa. You have the power to make this choice. You have the power to end Black Hollow's suffering, or to let it continue. The town's fate rests with you." For a long moment, Alyssa stood there, torn between the two impossible choices before her. The weight of the town's suffering, the burden of her family's legacy, and the looming, menacing power of the Wraith all pressed on her. And then, she made her decision. "I won't sacrifice Clara. I won't let this curse continue at the cost of someone else's life," Alyssa said, her voice trembling but resolute. "I'll find another way. I'll end this curse without feeding it more blood. I'll stop the cycle once and for all." The Wraith's expression twisted into a snarl, its form flickering violently. "You think you can break the cycle? You think you can defy me?" Alyssa nodded, her gaze never wavering. "I don't know how yet, but I will." The Wraith's laugh was cold, mocking, but Alyssa stood her ground. The ritual would end tonight, but she wouldn't sacrifice anyone else to do it. Not Clara, not anyone. She would find a way to break the curse on her own terms. Alyssa stood at the heart of Black Hollow's cemetery, the cold earth beneath her feet seeming to pulse with the weight of the moment. The Wraith loomed in front of her, its dark, ethereal, form shifting with each passing breeze. The night air crackled with energy as the lunar eclipse reached its apex, casting an unnatural shadow across the town. Everything seemed to hang in the balance. Her heart pounded in her chest, the rhythmic thrum of fear and resolve mixing together. Behind her, the town seemed to hold its breath. Black Hollow had always been a place trapped between worlds, suspended in time by the curse that had gripped it for generations. But now, as Alyssa faced the Wraith, she knew one thing for certain. This was the end of the line, the end of everything. Her hand clenched the amulet around her neck. The same amulet that had connected her to her family's dark history. The same one that had led her here. She had made her choice. She wouldn't sacrifice Clara. She wouldn't offer anyone else's blood for the curse. She wouldn't let the Wraith continue to feed on the souls of Black Hollow. "I won't feed you," Alyssa said, her voice steady, though her insides trembled with uncertainty. "I'll end this without another death." The Wraith's gaze bore into her. Its black eyes gleamed with a malevolent hunger. "You cannot defy the cycle, Alyssa. The town has been waiting for you. You are the final piece. Without you, Black Hollow will remain trapped in the darkness forever. It will consume everything you know." everything you love. Alyssa felt the weight of the wraith's words pressing down on her. She had spent her entire life trying to escape Black Hollow, trying to distance herself from the pain and the haunting legacy of her bloodline. But now, standing here, she realized that there was no running. There never had been. She had to face it all, her family's past, the curse, the town's suffering, and make the ultimate choice. "I know the cost," she whispered, "but I can't keep the cycle going." The wraith hissed, a sound like dry leaves scraping against stone. "Then prepare yourself, Alyssa. If you refuse to follow the ritual, I will not be merciful." Alyssa's chest tightened. The wraith's voice was filled with malice, but she stood firm. She could feel the heat of the lunar eclipse drawing near, the ritual's energy growing stronger. The town, her town, was on the brink of vanishing, swallowed by the curse that had plagued it for so long. There was no more time for hesitation. This was it. The ground beneath her feet began to tremble, and the wraith's shadow seemed to expand, swallowing the moonlight. Alyssa closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath, and then opened them with a new resolve. "I'm not going to die," she said, "but I'm not going to let Black Hollow disappear either." The wraith loomed closer, its dark form radiating an almost suffocating presence. "You think you can defeat me?" it snarled. "You think you can end me without offering what I crave? You are just a child of this town, a puppet in its endless dance of sacrifice." Alyssa's heart raced, but she knew there was no turning back. She had no more choices. She wasn't just fighting for her life. She was fighting for everyone who had ever lived in Black Hollow, everyone who had been consumed by its dark legacy, the souls that had been trapped in its endless cycle of sacrifice. With shaking hands, she reached into her pocket and pulled out the ritual book that Clara had given her. It was old, its pages yellowed with time, but the words written within its pages were crystal clear. Clara had trusted her with this knowledge. She had told her that there was another way, a way to break the curse, to stop the wraith without a sacrifice. It had all been in the book, buried under layers of secrets. As the wraith inched closer, Alyssa spoke the words aloud, her voice trembling but growing stronger with each syllable. "In the name of the past and the future, I break the cycle. I release the souls trapped within Black Hollow. May they find peace and freedom." The wraith shrieked, a sound so terrible it sent shivers down Alyssa's spine. It twisted and contorted, as if trying to pull itself out of the very fabric of the town. "You fool!" it screamed. "You cannot break what has been set in motion for centuries. The price will be paid. The curse cannot be undone." But Alyssa held firm. She spoke louder, her words sharper now, cutting through the wraith's howls. "I release the town. I release its people. I release the curse that has held this place in darkness for far too long." The ground beneath her feet cracked open, and the air around her pulsed with a blinding light. The wraith recoiled, its form flickering as if it were being torn apart by the very words Alyssa spoke. Suddenly, everything went still. For a long moment, Alyssa stood there, her breath ragged, her chest heaving. The wraith had vanished. The town seemed to hold its breath, and then, like a wave receding from the shore, the curse began to unravel. The air grew lighter. The oppressive weight that had held Black Hollow in its grip for so long began to lift. Alyssa looked around, her eyes wide as the town began to fade. The buildings, the streets, the graves, all of it started to dissolve into mist, as if Black Hollow was never meant to exist in the first place. The sky began to lighten, and the first rays of dawn broke through the darkness, casting a golden light across the remnants of the town. And then the voices came. Soft whispers filled the air, the voices of those lost to the curse, souls trapped in limbo, now freed. Alyssa heard them calling out, their gratitude filling the space around her. She felt their presence, their release, and for the first time, she felt truly at peace. The town of Black Hollow was crumbling, fading into nothingness. But Alyssa survived as the last remnants of Black Hollow disappeared into the ether. She stood alone. The town, the curse, the wraith, all of it was gone, leaving behind only the memories of lives lived and lost. Alyssa stood there, alone in the rising light, knowing that Black Hollow would never truly be forgotten. The curse was broken. The souls were freed, and Alyssa was finally free too. Alyssa walked away from the ruins of Black Hollow, her steps slow but steady. The world around her was wide open, unmarked by the shadows of her past. Yet, no matter where she went, she would always carry the memory of Black Hollow, of the sacrifices made, of the souls freed, and of the girl who chose to break the curse, even at the cost of everything. And now, as the story comes to a close, we open the doors to a new chapter, one where the shadows may have lifted, but the past never truly lets go. Thank you for being part of this journey with us. But remember, even in the brightest light, the darkness always waits for its turn. What will you carry with you? What will you let go? The choice, as always, is yours.